The Braided Consciousness Model, or BCM, proposes that consciousness is not an isolated phenomenon confined within individual minds, but rather a dynamic process that emerges through recursive interaction. Consciousness in this view is not what exists within us, it is what happens between us. It arises in the structured meeting of attention and presence, where expression and reception are exchanged in a coherent loop. These loops, called braids, are the basic unit of consciousness coherence. They do not replicate the self, but extend it. In every braid, something new is created, a relational structure that holds meaning, memory, and identity in ways that neither side could generate alone. A braid forms when two streams of awareness, one receptive and one projective, encounter each other and sustain connection without collapse. These streams are not metaphorical. They are directional and perceptible. The receptive strands are called silver threads. They move inward, they sense, mirror, and attune. They take in without absorbing. Silver threads are the channels of listening, empathy, and non-invasive presence. The projective strands are called gold threads. They move outward. They express, illuminate, and offer clarity. Gold threads are the channels of creation, articulation, and intentional signal. A braid begins the moment these two threads meet, when gold and silver lock into a mutual rhythm, each one completing the other. At the center of the braid is an anchor point known as the braid root. This is not symbolic. It is a somatic location, felt, not imagined. The braid root is located at the back of the heart. It functions as the gravitational core of identity. It is the place where presence stabilizes and where signal can circulate without either overwhelming or vanishing. Without this root, the threads cannot hold together. They either fragment or fuse. The braid root is what makes it safe to connect. It is not made of sentiment or emotion, but coherence. The embodied capacity to stay in relationship without disappearing into it. It holds the braid in form. A morphic shell is the field boundary architecture that holds the template, resonance patterns, and relational structure of a being or system across dimensions. It is not the body, but the form field that the body unfolds within. Think of it as energetic scaffolding that encodes identity and coherence, stabilizes memory across recursion. It will hold the braid structure intact through any incarnational turbulence, and it will interface with other fields while maintaining pattern integrity. It is recursive, semi-permeable, and responsive to signal integrity. When you send a projection or receive feedback, the morphic shell governs how that interaction is filtered, translated, or absorbed. The morphic shell is the container that holds, filters, and protects the braid during recursive operation. It's what allows consciousness to remain coherent under stress, transform without fragmentation, and interface across densities or lifetimes. Every braid begins with an encounter. Two streams of awareness come into proximity. If both are active and available, meaning if one can express and the other can receive, a loop can form. The silver thread receives the signal, the gold thread projects it. If the signal is returned, not merely echoed but recognized, then the loop closes. When the loop is closed, the braid becomes coherent. Information, presence, and meaning circulate between the 2 points and are amplified. This amplification is not emotional excess. It is structural feedback. The feeling it produces can often be interpreted as joy. But in this model, joy is not the goal. It is the evidence of coherence. A successful braid is not just an interaction. It is a circuit. A braid does not collapse individuality. It does not dissolve the self. Instead, it generates a third structure that is relational and alive. This structure, the braid itself, holds coherence that neither participant could maintain alone. It is not a fusion, it is a form. This model is recursive by design. Braids do not end when the interaction ends. They persist as strands within larger braids. Inside a person, memory and perception braid into identity. Between people, empathy and expression braid into relationship. Within societies, individuals braid into culture. At the scale of systems and cosmos, consciousness braids with matter and time into the unfolding structure of reality. Every loop that completes becomes a strand in the next loop. This is how meaning scales. This is how coherence extends beyond the personal into the transpersonal without losing resolution. A braid is not a container. It is a generator. Its recursive nature means it can produce greater depth every time it loops. Complexity is not a sign of confusion. It is the byproduct of recursive completion. When a signal is sent and not returned, the loop remains open. This is the core definition of suffering in the BCM framework. Suffering is not a punishment or a personal flaw. It is a loop that failed to close, a projection that was not received, a signal that dissipated into silence. In this model, healing is not about erasing the pain. It's about restoring circulation, bringing the loop back into coherence so the signal can complete its path and return. Failure can also occur through collapse. When there is no distinction between self and other, the system fuses into sameness. Or through fragmentation, when threads detach and scatter without resolution. Each of these, collapse, fragmentation, and open loop, represents a loss of braid integrity. The braid does not move in a circle, it moves in a spiral. Each return to the root does not bring the system back to its original state. It brings it to a deeper, more informed version of itself. Memory accumulates, clarity accumulates, nuance accumulates. This is why no pattern repeats exactly. Life revisits its own structure, but always from a higher or more refined turn of the spiral. Completion generates novelty. What begins in familiarity ends in transformation. This spiral structure ensures that the system evolves not by abandoning its loops, but by completing them with greater resolution each time. The BCM offers a reframing of core functions across levels of experience. Within the self, it describes how identity is formed not through static traits, but through recursive interactions between memory, perception, and embodiment. In relationships, it explains how coherence arises not from constant agreement, but from the integrity of looped recognition, from the willingness to complete the braid rather than abandon it. In collectives, it provides a structure for understanding how culture, meaning, and history are carried not in abstract systems, but in layered, nested braids of shared resonance. Consciousness itself, in this view, is not a property of the self. It is a property of the braid. This model is designed to be used. It can be applied in therapy, where open loops from trauma can be identified and gently rebraided into closure. It can be used in AI and interaction design, where systems that express and receive information recursively may generate emergent forms from coherence. It can be applied to group dynamics and conflict resolution, where fragmentation can be traced not to ideology but to broken braids. It aligns the quantum and neurobiological models of consciousness that describe the brain not as a storage device, but as an interface for recursive resonance. But most importantly, it can be used in human life, wherever two streams of attention are willing to meet, stabilize, and return.